This is Sally Treanor, and this is the watercolor series. We are studying the technique of watercolor, and this particular program today is apples, and apples in all kinds of manifestations. Natural apples with natural color, local color as we call it, and colors that you can imagine in any way, shape, or form. So we will be exploring appleness, but not in your ordinary terms. We're going to start with a quarter sheet of paper that we're going to use tape to define into quadrants so that we have 4 equal spaces on which to explore. Just a single apple is fine, or any piece of fruit that you want to do this way. So let's begin. I have discovered over the years that I'm best to not use old tape. The stickiness of it changes if you don't use it up in a timely way. And you can use it for other things, but when you're applying tape to watercolor paper, the paper has to be dry, and the tape itself this is just plain masking tape. It's not artist tape. I don't see the reason to buy artist tape, and I don't see the reason to buy painter's tape, the kind they use to keep from paint spreading when they're like doing window paints and the like. Oops, that's too short. I like just plain regular masking tape. I don't like another color because sometimes that interferes with my being able to see what I'm doing. The other thing I wanted to say is do not leave your masking tape on for weeks and weeks and weeks, because eventually it's going to bond with the paper and it's going to leave residue on the paper. And you really don't want to adulterate your paper. So I almost never bother to mark off where it should go, and sometimes when it goes awry. But I'm a painter who's lazy, and so you will see me do things that probably are not best practice, but that's how I have to live. Because if I measured everything and took the temperature of everything and was so exact with all, measured every bit of quantity of paint I put into a mixture, I would go nuts, and I would have to stop talking, and it just wouldn't be good. So this is the raw me. Okay, now the other thing I do is gently rub it. And even though I'm not going to be painting wet and wet, so I'm not going to have a lot of bleed, I still don't, if I happen to do background, I don't want there to be bleed underneath this. So, and I can leave this tape in place longer than just this period of time. Like if I come back to work on this during the week, I'll still have the tape. But so now I've defined my spaces. That gives me an intellectual differentiation of what's going to happen in every space. And the first thing I'm going to do is decide, here's my apple. Isn't this a yummy looking apple? I believe it's a Honeycrisp. It's worth its weight in gold, I'm sure. Okay, you can draw your apple or not. The first thing we're going to do is a local color apple. That means I'm going to try and replicate what I'm seeing in front of me. In this case, I see that my yellow is probably a New Gamboge. My red, well, think about this yourselves. Just look at this and see what you would pick, because yours might be different. I'm going to use Winsor Red. It's not my usual first choice for a primary because it's so assertive, but this color is absolutely a primary red. It doesn't move in either direction, warm or cool. That's a primary red, and that's what Winsor Red is. And mind you, on this first go round, I'm just going to keep this here so you can sort of, you're not going to see the view I'm seeing, but you can see how I'm approaching this apple. All right, so I'm wetting my red, wetting my yellow. I think I'll cop out a bit and go with cobalt. That's going to give me the green. Nah, take that back. Antwerp, the Antwerp blue. Okay, so I have dampened all of those, and somebody asked me this the other day. Sometimes this is a memory thing. This is not how to put it. This is not something that's again professional standards. When I am thoughtful and thinking about things and not rushed, I dampen my paints ahead of time. I don't start out by squeezing new paint into the wells. I do not like to dip into new paint because it loads my brush. I end up rinsing it out and wasting all that paint. And you know how I hate to do that. So instead, I dampen the paint. I have this again, this is a Kathy Skirker thing. She gave me this. See this little squirt thing. So I squeeze that into some things. Sometimes I just wet it with my brush. But that is sufficient to me to awaken the paint enough that I can easily make my mixtures and make my puddles without a lot of effort. I have to scrub a little bit to activate even more, but I'm fine with that. It's not that is not a burden to me. Whereas if I've got stuff too soupy or if it's brand new paint, I have to be very careful when I'm making my mixtures, and that really irritates me. I mean, it really isn't just that I'm chintzy about the paint. It's that it's a bothersome thing. I don't need that much paint for most of my mixtures. I was going to do this without drawing, but I don't think I will. Okay, so I'm going to start with yellow. And I can pretty much, I could do the whole thing. I'm not gonna, but I want to make sure that the yellow parts of this apple are yellow. And incidentally, when you use watercolor pencil, you can also correct your drawing, because if you scrub the watercolor pencil a little bit, it disappears. That's always good. And I'm going to let this yellow go down into the shadow, even though obviously the shadow is not yellow. And remember I said we were using Antwerp, so there is a green area where the stem erupts. And so I'm just going to start while this is wet, suggesting that, so I remember where it is, because I didn't draw it in. And you know, this is going to bleed, and I'm painting it on, so it's not the usual drop-in color sort of addition, but it's losing the edge of the green into the yellow the way it looks to me right here. I've just replicated something that is natural to those shapes. All right, now we're going to come in with the dangerous color. It's a red. This is such an assertive color. Be very careful what the value of your puddle is. So now I'm going to come in as I see it. And man, here we go again with the lights drawing. because the lights, and don't forget you've got highlights, because you know, if you've got a light shining on it, it's giving you highlights, which are just white, so leave some white. The value of this puddle is maybe a 5, if that. But it's looking darker because that's a very assertive color. So I am using this wet yellow and now adding my red to it to produce these striations of color that I'm seeing naturally here. Now things have dried out enough that I should come back in with some yellow again. Let's just wet that so I get blending happening. So I'm leaving a bunch of white. I'm touching some of that red area and letting it bleed, and it'll bleed in both directions. So some of the stuff you've just learned from making those rows of color and letting them merge and meet each other, some of that you should use with this. You know, everything you do leads to something else in watercolor and extends your ability to control it. So now I'm just kind of going over this with yellow. I want the yellow to be active because I want them to bleed together. And I might have to do this more than once. I'm already getting some nice stuff happening with this apple, even though it looks a little like a tomato. And let's come back in with some of that blue-green that we made. And let's start now we're touching the red with the green and letting the green invade that and move the red out of the way. Sometimes it blends, sometimes it moves it out of the way. Remember that method is very dependent on what's the wettest. And I can play with this a lot at this stage, but let's all get to this stage with what you're doing. And I want a realistic apple as our first apple. And remember, you're not finishing the apple at this stage. So I would come in with another layer of Winsor red. And so now a new transparent layer. I don't even have to change the value of the Winsor red. A new layer of Winsor red is going to give me a darker area. So let me just show you how that happens. And it's something that it's somehow it's not instinctive. People think they have to come in with a little bit of gray to shadow something, or a little bit of blue or something. And while it's okay to use those things, the first thing you should do to darken an area, the first thing is another layer of the color. And you, as I said, it's not natural somehow. You'd have to force yourself to learn that. So I'm coming in with a second layer of Winsor red. And it's going to give you a natural shadow. I don't know if you can see this happening yet, but of course I will post pictures on Hope Studio. And where it's already darker, it'll be darker still. It'll change it a little when it's and now I'm starting to get my curvature, my roundness, my third dimension. I'm not any longer dependent on the glow of the red hitting the wet yellow. I don't care about that anymore.
So your painting is dry underneath then?
Yes, I'm painting on dry paper now. I've done everything I want to do to get a base. And I won't do this every place I see it. I might do that at a different stage. Oops, that's too much value. But I'm doing it sufficiently to like over here. This actually is quite a bit darker. So I have to come in for another go on that. The other thing I often do, and I think it's kind of interesting to do it, is I might at this point add a different red.
On the edge?
And the reds that I could add here to get interesting things happening, I could add alizarin.
Mhm.
It's a very, very assertive, intense red. Different from Windsor Red.
Are you using a different size brush now, Sally?
Now I could be using, this is an 8, just because I happened to pick it up. Just it was there, you know. Also, I've got a lot of control over a smaller brush. And I'm kind of following the pattern of things, but one of the things that will help you get roundness, dimension is, you're going to the edges where it's away from the light, in my instance anyway. If you made your problem worse by having a backlit subject, that is not doing that for you. And Cricut always picks the hard way. Getting her picture in the shadow, I mean the backlight of the window.
It looks so pretty there, though.
I bet it does. Okay, let me just show you, for instance, what a different red is going to do. One of the different reds you can use is brown madder. Remember, that's a red brown.
Mhm.
See what happens, and again, blot your brush. This area is still wet. I'm dropping some brown madder into it, and it's darker than the Windsor Red, not in value, but in appearance, because it's a low intensity red. And so it is assisting me in creating that shape. But if I were to come in with blue there, I would end up having a harder time making this blend in and be part of what's happening with the color. And part of what the illusion I'm trying to create, which is of that, it's the same color. If you were to hold this apple up and have it in the light, it's the same color and the same value all over. It's the way the light hits it that changes the color, that changes the value. So you're always working with the same color, and this is kind of replicating that. It's letting me do that without having to work so hard. I am gonna just take my brush with just plain water on it. And again, I'm gonna touch the bottom of the apple. And there's some available paint there that's going to bleed out into the shadow. Here's one of the reasons I like colored shadows. you've heard me talk about reflex light. Reflex light is reflected light. When you've got something colored against, especially against white, you're going to get a reflection of that color in the white surface. And you can play games and exaggerate it and end up getting a very lively, beautiful shadow. Whereas if you just did a gray shadow, man, it would just be like a gray puddle. It's no pleasure to it. I'm going to drop some blue into that now. And now I'm getting some bleed from the apple, so some red. I'm dropping in some blue, even though there's no real blue in the apple. And I'm doing it right next to the bottom of the apple, which is the very darkest place in your painting, is where your object meets the surface on which it rests. Yeah, I'm starting to like this shadow a lot. Let me come back up here now, and I'm going to come back in with a little more green, because it's really quite a distinctive green. That's where it dips into to become the stem area. So it's a shadow, but it's also a shape. It's really green. And I just dragged my finger through the wet apple. That was not very smart. I'll take care of that later. This is wet. I want to dry it because I want to put the stem in. And I would work my way around the apple to do a little more work on making it round. And I like the notion of putting different colors, different reds in, but not something that's going to change the intensity of the red. Just it's going to change it because it's a darker red or a different red. I do that a little bit more to show you. I just love that little tool. It's so quiet. I can talk when I'm using it. I'm going to show you what alizarin does, although it doesn't do a lot of different things from the brown matter. It is still different enough from the Winsor red that it's going to make a difference in the shadowed portion, and it will just look shadowed. It isn't. I haven't introduced something new there. This is not one of my better apples, but it's okay. Okay, stem. I'm gonna mix up a puddle that is mostly green. I'm going back to my original colors. And I'm making sure to get my yellow in there. And I think it's dry enough. This is a really kind of short, stubby stem, but kind of eccentric looking in shape. And it's the darkest green that's right next to it. And that's a little too dark. So I don't consider this done, but I consider this to be the basis of a finished realistic apple. I now I'm going to come into this bottom area. Remember I said where it meets the surface on which it's resting, that is the very darkest place. And it is because the light doesn't get under there. And so you don't want such a distinct line that it looks like just a line. You want it to look like just a dark area of shadow. So the decision I've made about my my apple is that I'm going to use a violet that I will make from, let's see, I'm going to make it from cobalt blue and permanent rose. And so those are the two things that are going to be evident in this. And we will use Quin Gold. So Quin Gold, cobalt blue, and permanent rose. You're not going to see much Quin Gold. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to do what I suggested to you. I'm just going to make tiny marks to paint around. If you know, I'm so stupid with some of this stuff that I forget what I do, and so I ignore them. So I'm not going to guarantee that this is going to remain a highlight, but that's my highlight right now. I've also got something strange happening down here. I'm going to make a mark. I'm getting, speaking of reflection, I'm getting a reflection from the little white piece that the apple is sitting on, right here across this part of the base of the apple. It's not really white, but it's definitely lighter there. So talk about bounce of light. This is light bouncing back and giving me a sort of highlight there. So, all right. One of the things that we haven't talked about when you're doing stuff like this is what you do to remain clean. No mud. Now, it's going to be a little different in this case because I'm not going to get mud as I do my second layer in this. I'm going to make a big enough puddle because this is first layer. And I didn't make a big do-up out this last time, but I am this time because this is a trap when you get further along in this exercise. You might remember that I dried things off last time before I went to do next layer. That's why I got the sharp lines and the like. So just it's a little too much value, but that's easily remedied. I'm still doing an apple that's realistic in shape. And the kind of contour that you get. I'm going to go right over that place that I marked before and just kind of try and remember it. Okay, I've kept some highlights. That's because I marked them. Even we masters screw it up. I am being facetious, of course. Now remember I told you that I always paint the shadow at the same time. And I have observed the shape of that shadow very carefully. And this is the darkest dark shadow. And it's not very dark. It's just, you know, an interruption of the light, but there's still plenty of light in the room. Now, I don't have to wait for this to dry because I'm staying in the same color family. But if I want to infuse this with any of that yellow, I'm going to have to wait for it to dry. And why is that?
Because you're going to get brown.
Why?
Because
You'll
they will.
complete the triad.
That's right. Because the violet is a secondary color and it is opposite on the color wheel of yellow. So when you complete the triad, you lower the intensity of everything. So if I were to drop yellow into this, I would get this awful, awful mix of colors. It couldn't help but give me that awful mix. Okay. I'm gonna put in, now I'm gonna drop in a lot of this. And I'm looking at my apple, but I'm not wedded to it anymore. I'm not caring about the striations so much. And again, because the light is just so powerful in drying things out, I'm going to get some edges. I'm going to leave them. Oh, this is pretty. This is straight cobalt blue now. And of course, I'm going to bring it down into my shadow. And I am going to go ahead and lose that edge in the shadow because I just want it to work as a reflection, still not a distinct shape. Let me see, just a little bit more here. You know, one of the things that is a danger too that I haven't talked about, when we're doing shapes like this, it's quite easy to fall into the trap of outlining so that you end up with a halo going on. So you have to be kind of wary of that. So you have to work fast in this iteration. Okay, I now have on my brush Quinn Gold, and I am putting a transparent layer of Quinn Gold, not paying a whole lot of attention to where it's going. The reason I chose Quinn Gold is that it's a very warm yellow. Now it's still giving me some odd areas that you wouldn't see in an apple. Well, maybe you would in a rotting apple. And I'm also bringing it down into the shadow. And I'm just, so these are all transparent layers. So this part is really quick and you can all work along. If your painting is dry at this point, go ahead and add your third color at this point. And it doesn't have to be everywhere. I'm also gonna I'm gonna take that edge out of the, it was giving me an edge in the shadow that I didn't need. Okay, took it out. That's all I'm gonna do with the yellow probably. It's dangerous, any kind of yellow, dangerous at this point because you're putting yellow on top of violet and Oops. So you're going to get that kind of unattractive combination, but not as bad as if you put that yellow in on top of that wet violet. Really is important that, you know, this layer should be dry. I mean, on top of dry. And you can just paint along with me if you want on this at this point. I'm going to dry that again because I'm still in dangerous territory with that yellow and the violet of making just yucky looking something. I'm starting to see a contoured apple. It's kind of blotchy, but it doesn't bother me. I've chosen not to let it bother me because I chose to let edges persist when I put in that second, you know, while the purple was wet, when I put in the blue, the purple had started to dry sufficiently that I knew I was going to get edges. So I got to come back now with my cobalt. And cobalt is my choice here for starting to get more contour. So as I look at my apple, I know and I'm blotting, so I have control with water in my brush. And I'm going to look at this shape of where the top of the apple indents for the stem. And doing that with cobalt blue. And I'll come back to that. But right now, I'm just creating the indented part. And now I'm going to look at where the shadows are on the apple itself and start to develop those areas. So this is just shadow I'm working with now. I'm not working anymore with the striations of color that are evident in my apple. And because I've dried this off, everything I'm putting on now is a separate transparent layer. I don't have to use a lot of value right now. It's not needed to make this happen. And I can even come back in and lose some of those edges the way I ordinarily would with a shadow. But I kind of like the edges that I'm getting. And I absolutely don't need a lot of value in this. It's just, it simply is not needed.
It looks just like a glaze almost.
It is, yeah, it is very transparent, which cobalt is. I am going to lose an edge around that area that's the funny that funny area that has reflected light from the surface of the table. So remember your tricks. Don't think you're circumscribed on any of this. You can use any of your, you know, lost edges, anything you think is going to work to your advantage here. But we're not caring a whole lot about reality here, except that I want a sphere, not a severe. I want a three-dimensional object that I'm doing that started out as an apple. And just to play a little game, on the shadow. I'm going to get, because that had already started to dry, and just over the edge of that, it's going to give me that partially that final dark, maybe not in this iteration, maybe going forward. Again, I'm going to lose that edge. I can even, if I wanted to, make that edge with my stylus, and I would be assured that it would be the same color. I'm going to dry this again. You know, it's awfully handy to have a drying tool when you don't want to have to stop. But when it's necessary to have a dry surface to work the next layer. And now because of that yellow, what I'm putting in is starting to look kind of muddy. So it might be that I would not even use a triad for a painting like this, per se. I mean, it's already kind of a triad because you're using a primary and a secondary. So let's work on, now again, because I'm layering, I'm going to add a value, literally value, darkness, to anything I paint on top of something. So not a lot of value in my puddle again, but I'm coming into that to work on defining the depth of my little area where it where the stem emulates. And I'm going to lose the edge around that. And I will come back to that later on to do the stem itself. Okay, I'm going to come back down here again with the blue to just emphasize my little edge, because I dried that paper and I can do this. And I'm going to come in and lose the edge on the shadow side. And then I'm going to come in, again, very controlled water in my brush now. I don't want it to go all over the place. I'm going to lose a bit of that edge that I've just emphasized. And I think I'm gonna go ahead and use my stylus. Not in an uninterrupted line, but touch it again with a little bit more of that blue. And that's this. Let me dry it again and I'll do the stem. And I will use the yellow when I'm mixing the color for the stem. I have a little stubby stem on my apple. Okay, mixing the blue I had there and the Quinn Gold Grabbing some. I want it to be dark enough to show up, so it's going to be a little more saturated. Blot your brush. I'm going to use my stylus just to give some character to the stem. Taking off excess paint. And I think I'll drop in a little extra blue. And then I'm gonna, my stem actually has a little cast shadow next to it. So I don't want that to be very assertive, but just kind of there. And I'm gonna add a little bit more, a kind of a, depth shadow there. And lose the edge of that. And I think that's it for this iteration. I might come back to that later, but right now this is what I've got. So let's quickly go into this guy down here. And right now, I'm not going to be as abstract as what Pam did, because I'm kind of leaving that for the last one. But I'm going to outline, whoops, wrong tool. I'm going to outline some shapes. And some of these shapes are darker because they're color, and some of these shapes are just darker because they're in shadow. But this is the one where we want discrete shapes. And it's something like defining continents. I'm already having a good time with this. That doesn't mean it's going to be wonderful. It's just that I'm having a good time. And let's see. So I've done this with my watercolor pencil. And let's see what I'm going to use for a triad.
Could you hold that up a little closer to the camera, just so we could just see what you've done?
How's that? No? Yes? Can you see
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. Thank you.
I mean, it sort of has lost its appleness except for its exterior shape. So I'll go back to maybe using something akin to local color. So I'm going to be using, I'll go back to Windsor Red and New Gamboge and Antwerp. Now, I said to you, I wanted discrete areas and that you can drop in color, but you can't blend it, but only within a discrete area. So let me start with a red area. And it's going to be like kind of like a jigsaw puzzle. And you can only work on areas that don't have something wet next to them. So again, it's handy to have a tool for this. Do I want to drop in any color into that? Maybe let's drop in a little yellow. And you cannot go to another area and forget about one that you've started. You have to do the whole thing while it's wet. So I'm dropping some yellow into it, and I'll take a picture of this so you can appreciate what's going on. Okay, now I'm still working red. This is another good area that should be red. Not quite saturated enough. Don't forget that you can actually drop the color that you started with into your puddle while it's active. And by active, I mean wet. But you can also come in, for instance, I can drop in, I'm going to drop in some brown matter and let it do its thing inside that little puddle. And I'm not going to worry about anything except that puddle. This is still quite wet, so I can drop in some brown matter to it too. Let's see. I've got going on here another area where I'm going to do red, a bigger area. Making it a little more saturated. It's darker area because it's a little bit in shadow, turning away from the light. And boy, that's a wet puddle. So let's wick some of that up. So thirsty brush, get rid of some of that puddle. So it's a little more manageable. And I think I need to, no, I'm not going to do the shadow at the same time. I'm going to come in more with more brown matter into that because that's fun to do. Just dropping it in, just letting it go in. Some new gamboge because I can. Let's do another area. Okay, I've got another area that should be red, and it's right next to a wet red area. So how do I do that? I leave a discrete white line between the areas so that they do not touch. I want them to be discrete. And you're going to find that you like the white lines a lot sometimes too. I need to bring out my blue guns here. And we're using Antwerp. So I'm going to start with these guys because they're furthest from the light. Just drop in some Antwerp into those. So you don't have to worry about the mixing if you leave that little bit of dry paper between them. And I'm having a good time just seeing what happens in these areas as I add color to them. You drop in the color, remember the wettest area moves other pigment out of the way. Now it blends a little bit, but it's also going to give you a glow that is very distinctly that color you've just added. Okay, this area is, again, we're going back to our Windsor red. Blot your brush. This is a big area. Kind of light in value. Again, there's a big puddle. I'm going to take that out. But I also want to make sure that I've got lots of saturation in that puddle. So making my puddle of red more saturated. Letting it bleed around. Come in with my other colors. Grabbing up more yellow, making that puddle more saturated. When I drop this color in, and don't brush it in, just drop it in, and I see it moving the red out of the way and the yellow starts to glow, it just is magical to me. Let's also add a little bit of blue to that. And don't forget to blot your brush. And this is where I'm chiefly seeing this happening down here. Oh, boop, didn't blot it enough. Use gravity to help you make that color move around for you. I'm getting a watermark that I don't want in that shape, so I'm just very controlled amount of water in this brush. I'm losing that edge just to get rid of it. I could fall in love with each one of these shapes. Okay, up here, let's go ahead and start that with yellow. Now this guy is already dry, but I'm gonna go ahead anyway and leave that little edge of dry paper between them, because over here I have to do that. one of the nice things about using a smaller brush is they have lots of control over the water in the brush. So when you're doing your drop in, you should probably not use one of your bigger brushes. Let's see what is happening in reality here. Okay, a little bit of blue into that yellow, which is wet, and it turns green, of course. I'm doing that just at the edge, just not too much. And let's come in with some of the red. Blot your brush. I keep glancing back at my apple, not because I'm trying to make this realistic, but just to remember where things are in contour. I touched this big red area so that some of the red would flow into the in this shape from down here. But I need to come back with yellow. So yellow is what's dominating here. Remember, the last one in is the guy who wins. Okay, let's come over here. Again with yellow. And again, I'm gonna leave that little sliver of white paper. I don't have to because this is dry now and so is this. And again, I'm gonna come in with my blue. Just gonna touch it around the edge. Make sure you blot so that you don't invade with a big bolus of color. I'm not brushing it in, I'm dropping in. When I say I'm dropping in, I'm just touching it so that the paint flows out of the brush and it's gonna find its own way to mix or dominate because it's the last one in now. And we need some red in there. Whew. Now let's come into the middle. And we're going to come to the middle with yellow also. And leaving that little strip of white because it is going to be pretty nice. It's going to be just kind of effective in an odd way. Can paint right over the stem because it's yellow. Let's drop in some green. Oh, I don't have much on the brush. And following my usual rule, everything is in the party together. I think I'll have to switch to a slightly larger brush. So I'm gonna make most of this yellow. I'm not being terribly consistent about the little white areas, but sort of doesn't matter. The predominant ones are there. Point. Okay, so that whole area now is filled in, and so now it's start to drop in color to it. Oof. We're gonna have to stop in a moment, and I will finish some of this off camera, or should I leave this till next week? We're running out of time is what I'm saying. I want to look at where you are with all of yours. I haven't really started down here. So I have very weird looking apple here. It's not expressing itself as an apple yet. I don't know if it will finally. The big thing that needs anchoring is the stem. And I haven't really started on the shadow yet. So let's just mix up something that'll give us a stem color. Again, we go to full palette. Just really needs contrast. I'm going to wick up some of that. And I'm also going to just use a little of it to give us a little more of the shadow effect. But we don't want that to be too deliberate.